Aaron Bushnell, American airman, university student and martyr. Documentary movie by Vadim Tikhonov, produced in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Contemporary English dictionaries do not provide all-embracing articles on this word. The commonplace meaning of martyr, which is offered by respectable authors of dictionaries, does not reflect the fact that the Greek word martyr has appeared in usage with its original meaning in the military field in the pre-Christian period of ancient history. In essence, the martyr is a soldier who steps out of the ranks on his own initiative in a forward direction in order to go beyond the demands of duty. Inspired by the esprit de corps, ancient heroes died rather than surrender to an already victorious adversary. By committing a military feat and dying, sometimes martyr elevated the esprit de corps of other soldiers to such an extent that even the outcome of a battle could change. The ancient army was not helpless in the stricken field when its soldiers were ready for audacious feats. The word martyr itself expresses something heroic in its sounding. By giving up his own life, a heroic ancient warrior demonstrated to all the combatants around him, "I do not surrender to the adversaries." All modern dictionaries clarify this word mostly in its church-related context, as if it was the main denotative meaning. When clerics started writing stories about persecutions of the masses of Christians in the dawn of this religion, they decided to borrow the word martyr from the secular military field. Only then the word martyr acquired the second meaning: a person killed for practicing the Christian faith. In the pursuit of the upcoming New World Order, the creators of this religion also borrowed another Greek word, ecclesia, from the secular domain to name a Christian religious congregation. By the way, there is a difference between the believers who suffered persecution, imprisonment, or property confiscation, but passed away by natural death, and those believers who were killed just for their faith. The Collins English Dictionary, which is compiled by the team of scholars, points out this word has entered in English from the Greek language, and that in Greek it had been in use before 900 Anno Domini. As regards to the meanings of this word in English, the co-authors of the Collins English Dictionary unfortunately lumped the two categories: the killed Christian believers and those who only suffered some discriminatory restrictions or property confiscations for their Christian practices as martyrs, thus extremely widening the church-related meaning. The compilers added several other meanings which appeared in the modern time, but they missed the initial denotative meaning of the word martyr from the military field. Lyrical interpretations of biographies of people who lived in the early Christian period, which had been marked by mass persecutions in the 2nd and 3rd centuries Anno Domini, have been confirmed by many reliable sources. However, as regards to alleged Christian martyrs from the early Middle Ages to nowadays, assessments of secular researchers and of church historians are different. Reality of that awful, more than 1,000 years lasted period was in something other. Starting from the 4th century, dominant churches had become the establishment which served as the instrument of control of consciousness, organized terror, and imposed decimation. Moreover, the parishioners often themselves had been the owners of slaves or serfs. Priests and monks had been turned into spies on parishioners of all churches. Such deplorable conditions had for many centuries existed in different parts of the world. Dominant churches and the state together persecuted those who were reported as dissidents. Number of people who had been lost due to the death sentences, crusades, and inquisition is immense. They are counted by millions. Please keep in mind that we scrutinize the term which is essential for the purpose of my project. Don't you think that the term martyr fits also for these many victims who died from the hands of Christians? No other special term was introduced to label them. Secular historians, even some clerical historians, philosophers, and religious scholars look critical at the clerical categorization of some people whose circumstances and motivations are not completely clear or can be explained in different ways as martyrs. The dominant Roman Church has honored some of its informers and instigators of repressions as martyrs. Logically, these persons shouldn't have been enrolled in the martyrs list. Probably documented real victims of activities of Christian conquerors, rulers, and dominant churches of all periods outnumber those martyrs who died for the Christian faith from unbelieving pagans and believers of other religions. Who died from the hands of Christians? This huge category includes heretics, that is, Christian dissidents who fought for their right to build their lives differently from what was required by dominant churches, personal enemies of papas and of high priests, apostates, opponents of absolute power, supporters of social justice, humanitarians who opposed religious obscurantism, scholars who challenged religious dogmas with scientific discoveries, patriots who fought for the independence of colonies and against enforced Christianizations, proponents of separation of church and the state. These are the groups among the Christian countries' population which had experienced extermination by the state power on the ecumenical scale. Written sources, particularly a great number of archived extant documents and undeniable facts, give the impetus for contemplation about many people who fit the qualification of martyr, but are not placed into such a category. Dominant church fears that its victims' recognition as martyrs would exert a detrimental effect on all religious propaganda and clumsy whitewash of the Dark Middle Ages. People who lost their lives from the hands of Christians for being religious other, who thought and lived differently from the dominant church commandments, have counted millions. The state religion had not been overly attractive for the nations of the globe. As I informed the viewers about the two main distinct meanings of this word, I would like to emphasize that its first denotative meaning, which has historically risen from the military domain, is crystal clear. As regards to the second meaning of martyr, its extended controversial usage, just the conglomerate of people who were enrolled in the martyr long list and yet the enormous number of those who were omitted in this list deduce deep reflections. Who were executors and who were their victims in the dark Middle Ages? In this documentary, viewers learn about our contemporary who is recognized as a martyr, his life, motive of his action, and the message to the humankind. His relatives, comrades, soldiers, parishioners, and progressive forces throughout the globe mourn his early withdrawal. Talking about the life of a member of the USA Air Force and university student Aaron Bushnell, I tried to discover the underlying motive upon which his path ended up on extreme protest action. If in the winter of 2024 Aaron had shared his plan with anarchists, parishioners, relatives, or airmen, they would have done everything to dissuade him from committing an ultimate protest action. Although I gathered lots of memories, reports, photos, and arts on Aaron Bushnell, I do not at all pretend to say that my documentary is exhaustive. Collecting and sifting the material for this movie, I used the reliable sources in English which provide the most correct biographical data and honest evidence of his friends. According to his friends, Aaron Bushnell was born in 1998 in San Antonio, Texas. Other sources say he was born in 1999. He grew up in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in the closed community of Jesus, whose members follow the monastic way of life based on collectivity, mutual help, and labor. His father, David, is a USA Army veteran and the owner of a construction company. His mother works for the publishing company, which releases the Christian literature. From 2015 to 2017, Aaron was an employee of the same publishing company where his mother works. In the summer of 2016, upon graduation from the high school, Aaron had a journey in Israel and the occupied West Bank of Jordan. In 2019, Aaron left the community of Jesus. Being a person who grew up in the hierarchically structured religious community, he decided that he would fit for service in the USA Army. In April 2020, Aaron joined to the USA Air Force. Then he arrived in San Antonio, to be exact, into the Lakeland Air Base, where he passed successfully all trainings. In the summer of 2020, the well-known murder of an Afro-American George Floyd by a white policeman and the subsequent mass protests in the USA and other countries served for Aaron an additional impact to appraise the real situation with human rights and social justice in his country. In 2020, he completed the main course of trainings and continued to serve for the military. Almost 4 years, which he spent in the American Air Force, had given him an enormous learning experience. At the Lakeland Air Base, Aaron worked as a specialist for operations in the cyberspace. Meanwhile, he had been moving towards the bachelor's degree in the software programming from the University of South New Hampshire. In the autumn of 2023, Bushnell decided to leave the military for the civilian world. The USA Army members who wish to withdraw from the military career are offered the transitional period named the Skill Bridge program when they start their civil jobs. If Aaron could have been alive in May 2024, he would have been discharged from the military service under this program. According to the March 13, 2024 article written by Sasha von Oldershosen and published in the online media Texas Monthly, in January 2024, Bushnell had moved to Ohio to complete the Skill Bridge program. He had started a web development job. Sasha von Oldershosen carefully gathered the memories of Bushnell's friends, and she explains the transitions he had in his life. In 2019, the first crucial shift happened when he left the community of Jesus. Bushnell's friends recalled that he struggled with this transition out of the community. Meanwhile, he was not sorry about his decision. He didn't participate in any Christian services from 2019 to 2021. Stuart Rowe, 29 years old, a married Christian man, came across with Aaron in August 2021 at the Anglican Church in San Antonio called The Gathering, where members were encouraged to swap name tags with someone they would pray for throughout the week. Rowe saw Bushnell sitting alone, he recalled, and introduced himself. Bushnell shared that it was the first time he had gone back to church since leaving the community of Jesus. They exchanged phone numbers that day too. Aaron wished that Stuart Rowe and his wife Adriana Rios, 30 years old, would pray for his specific need, which he determined as figuring things out. The decision to join the military, friends say, was partly made out of a desire to move on from the community. It wasn't an easy transition. He always said that one of the hardest things about making friends was that people didn't understand the experience that he grew up in. Rowe recalled, "It is a big deal to leave the community," he added. He was in a period of feeling grief over that loss. Sasha von Oldershosen presents the recollections of Aaron's friends as he struggled to obtain a new sense of belonging. Bushnell felt alone at the Lakeland Air Base because he was raised and shaped in a collectivistic religious environment, unlike a majority of Americans. As Stuart Rowe candidly admits, "We are notoriously individualistic." Sasha von Oldershosen concedes that dissonance was sometimes a source of distress for Bushnell. He struggled to make sense of the ways life could be cruel and indifferent. Bushnell's altruism was limitless. He was disarmingly complex, not just sensitive and kind, but also animated by a zeal for social justice and deeply frustrated by systemic inequalities. Sasha von Oldershosen presents an account of his friends. "Be discerning," the couple Rowe and Rios told Bushnell when they saw him repeatedly go out of his way for others. He volunteered often, offering rides to unhoused folks at a moment's notice or handing out clothes and other supplies through mutual aid groups. Bushnell was someone who laughed hard and laughed quickly, Rowe said. If you were one of his people, you could count on him to show up, Rios said. Terence Braff, 30 years old, who also met Bushnell at the Anglican Church named Gathering in San Antonio, was interviewed by Oldershosen. Braff describes Aaron as a unique personality. Most young guys are not selfless like that. As regards to Aaron's move to the left and anarchist political views, Braff concedes he was predisposed to extreme belief systems because that is what he grew up with, very regimented, very fundamental belief systems. In the autumn of 2023, the second pivotal shift in Bushnell's life happened when he came to a decision to withdraw from the military service. His upbringing, bright-thought education, self-education, and the objective analysis of the situation in his country as well as in the world led him to unite with like-minded people. Bushnell wanted to apply his efforts for the future social and power reorganization of his country. His searches brought him to the anarchists groups. American anarchists wished to establish the horizontal structures of power instead of the current vertical hierarchical structure. In January 2024, Aaron visited San Antonio the last time. Undoubtedly, Aaron Bushnell was a distinctive personality, respected and loved by diverse people. Airmen who were trained and served with him for the USA Air Force, parishioners and unhoused folks who got to know him as a caring and attentive friend, and those who participated in activities of local anarchist groups together with him. When I read the deep psychological portrayal of Aaron Bushnell and his brief biography, carefully assembled by Sasha von Oldershosen in her article published in Texas Monthly, I reflexively recall the words written by a British writer and scholar, Clive Staples Lewis, in Allegory of Love. The gaze turned inward with a moral purpose does not discover character. No man is a character to himself, and least of all while he thinks of good and evil. Character is what he has to produce. Within, he finds only the raw material, the passions and emotions which contend for mastery. That unitary soul or personality which interests the novelist is for him merely the arena in which the combatants meet. It is to the combatants, those accidents occurring in a substance, that he must attend. Anarchists had become his close friends. In their circle, the greeting "comrade," not "sir," was filled with a special meaning and warmth. Aaron didn't have indolent teenage years. He believed the teenage years of his life were stolen. Each summer he worked to earn money. His mindset had reflected the strict conservative Christian views on love and marriage. Aaron was a straight man. He felt some discomfort in searches for an acquaintance for the purpose of marriage. He realized the difficulties of dating in the modern time and the drawbacks of online dating applications. According to his comrades, he avoided saying such words as crazy, insane, and lame. Also, Aaron perceived that the word fuck conveys the misogynic connotation and indicates domination. When I read how much Aaron succeeded to do, I admire him and his ability to manage time. In the Lakeland Air Base, he worked shifts. To sum up, his poor but alas short life had been filled with a meaningful work, university study, support for ordinary hapless Americans, and, at the latter stage, conscious anti-war engagement. I look at his photo pictures. A sober, intelligent young man with perfectly regular features and a direct, kind expression is depicted. recalling Aaron, one of his close friends among anarchist communities, writes, Aaron himself was a principled, strong-willed man. He was steadfast, and I respected that greatly. Out of millions of Americans, only several persons may be found who have altruism and empathy of such an extent that a 25-year-old airman, Aaron Bushnell, demonstrated toward sorrow, suffering by distant and personally unknown to him Palestinians. He was not the first one who committed an extreme protest act against the complicity of his country in the Israeli military operation, which started in November 2023 in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli invasion of Gaza had lasted for the second month when, on Friday, December 1st, 2023, a person covered in a Palestinian flag lit themselves outside the Israeli consulate in Atlanta, Georgia. A security guard who tried to intervene was also injured, according to the Associated Press report. The identity of the self-immolated person was not revealed, but Associated Press and Reuters informed their readers about the event. Did an American airman, Aaron Bushnell, know about this action? We must answer to this question in affirmative. Undoubtedly, he not only knew it, but also guessed what exactly this person missed to do. A public statement about themselves and the purpose of their protest action for the largest media in Atlanta and the world. Then it becomes clear why Aaron didn't miss to notify Atlanta Community Press Collective, as well as some other large alternative media about his intention to commit an extreme protest action. On the fourth month of the Israeli military operation in Gaza, being dressed in fatigues, he decisively would declare to Americans and to the whole world that he, as a USA military member, disagrees with the course of the American ruling class on keeping the military aid to Israel. Unlike the December 1st, 2023 first extreme protest action in Atlanta, the second ultimate protest act against the USA complicity into the Israeli invasion of Gaza would become well known on the planet. This happened on the day February 25, 2024, outside the gate of Embassy of the State of Israel in Washington, District Columbia, USA. Account of an independent journalist, Talia Jane. An independent New York-based journalist, Talia Jane, writes about her reaction when she got to know and watched the video of this harrowing protest action among its first viewers. Her article, titled Aaron Bushnell's Self-Immolation Protest, needed to be seen, but that didn't make it easy to report. Starting from February 29, 2024, has been published in the online edition of Rolling Stone. Sunday afternoon, I opened Twitter to see a report circulating that someone attempted to set themselves on fire outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, District Columbia. I reposted that report and noted that this is second such incident to occur. Information about the first in Atlanta in December 2023 remains largely unknown, and wrote that generally self-immolation is an extremely rare, extremely disturbing form of protest whereby a person commits to end their life as a final act of desperation for their cause. Soon after, I received a message from an editor of Atlanta Community Press Collective with a link to a Twitch channel. Here is the video, he wrote. We aren't releasing it yet. I clicked. It was immediately clear that current reported statements were self-showing what happened and that dissemination of fact was urgently needed. In a video downloaded into Twitch, the soldier dressed in fatigues, appears. My name is Aaron Bushnell. I am an active duty member of the United States Air Force, and I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I am about to engage in an extreme act of protest. But compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it is not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal. I will no longer be complicit in genocide, he said, before dousing himself in liquid and fumbling to ignite his pants with a lighter, while live streaming everything on Twitch. Free Palestine, he shouted, as flames engulfed him. Watching the footage, my brain became a piece of Velcro pulling away from reality. I took a deep breath and proceeded to do the job as comprehensively and sensitively as I could. I have covered a lot of protests in my time as an independent reporter, most not even garnering local coverage, and some instantly historic, like the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. I have covered dozens of protests for Palestinian liberation, both before and since October 2023. I have documented and experienced extremist violence. I have been arrested while operating as press twice. Reporters who received Bushnell's email before the live stream were reeling. Understandably so, a researcher sent me Bushnell's LinkedIn, at the time unconfirmed, and said there had been intense collective efforts to locate him and intervene, unsuccessfully. Reporters who watched events unfold live were too shaken to proceed. There are plenty of media guides and examinations about best practices for reporting graphic content. There is nothing about how to navigate the scrambled fog your brain becomes after witnessing a man burn himself alive, to watch him choke on the smoke of his own flesh, to scream, "Free Palestine," until he no longer can, to watch him stand at attention, silent, before finally collapsing, only his charred leg visible on screen, and then to try to ethically and comprehensively report what is clearly a major breaking story, absent institutional support to help gather, process, and publish information. As my brain spun, I operated on reflex, a mechanical series of choices. Screen record the video, screenshot the channel, archive the LinkedIn. Find a way to communicate a massive action in the fewest possible words. Select a photo, not too graphic, verifying it all. I got to work reporting the specifics in lieu of posting the video, as I have done in the past, to offer people an alternative to consuming highly graphic content, Aaron Bushnell's exact words and tone while speaking them. I checked timestamps to note how long it took for officers who were present to provide aid, 61 seconds. I transcribed the statements now seared in my brain. I don't need guns. I need fire extinguishers. The world dissolved around me, leaving only the work of reporting it out. Most people call it tunnel vision. The public response was jarring. Your reactions were normal, shock and horror. But then I began getting flooded by people badgering me to post video. Many of the demands callously just wanted gore. Some accusing me of suppressing news I broke to repress a movement. The flood carried to emails where people made all sorts of claims about why they needed the video. Friendly queries unanswered turned into follow-up insults. I removed my email from my Twitter bio, and the cascade slowed to a trickle. Eventually, in the evening, Talia Jane has posted online only a blurred version, the most she could ethically do, and even that was a step further than any major media outlet. Provocative news stories always bring out the crazy, as people cope with difficult reality by writing more comforting fiction, and opportunistic figures try to profit from that need for answers. Conspiracies swirled about the incident, some accusing me of involvement, of filming it and lying about the live stream, or claiming that the incident was fake. I wish it was fake. I wish a young man with the world ahead of him was not dead, that his family and friends were not heartbroken and traumatized, that Sunday, February 25, 2024, was a boring day where nothing happened. Amid this flurry, I was receiving direct messages and emails from reporters requesting the footage to verify it, requiring me to sift through the muck to make sure I didn't miss any. I probably did. Before the Twitch channel was taken down, I sent the link to a reporter at the New York Times to verify the authenticity of the incident and my reporting. They didn't cite me in their reporting, probably for the best coverage of the event itself. CBS, CNN, Al Jazeera and other outlets requested as well. I spent hours writing the same email. It is unclear if his family has been notified. The footage can't be released yet because he says his name at the start, and that is also unconfirmed. The ignition begins at 1 minute 29 seconds. If you don't need to watch the remainder, I strongly advise you stop there. WeTransfer incoming. I debated publishing the footage, worried about sensationalism versus pragmatism. I spoke with other reporters who determined it was newsworthy. I spoke with Aaron's close friends who determined that because it was Aaron's expressed wish for it to be published, it should be. It was decided by Aaron's community that if the most I could reasonably post contained a blur, it should be posted. I posted the video 15 minutes after Aaron Bushnell succumbed to his injuries, and half an hour before his loved ones learned he had. Bushnell emailed multiple alternative news outlets, including Atlanta Community Press Collective, with a link to the Twitch channel and an announcement that he would be partaking in an extreme act of protest against the genocide of the Palestinian people. Some didn't see the email until it was too late. Others did and worked tirelessly with researchers to identify, locate, and stop whatever he meant by an extreme act of protest. I hope people know how hard they worked to intervene and how severely it shattered them that they couldn't. In spite of that, I am still baffled that I became the one to carry this story forward. I hope those reporters and researchers know I was working to do justice to the story on their behalf, holding them with me as they grappled with the unimaginable shock of witnessing in real time what he meant. Critics, eager to denigrate Bushnell's action, claim Bushnell's self-immolation will inspire copycats, inaccurately dismissing the most extreme form of political protest as just suicide. They insist detached from reality that those in mourning are glorifying suicide, that no one will remember his protest, which does nothing and is merely a result of mental illness. These are voices who have panned pro-Palestinian protests, crowing their absurd claims that sitting in the road to call for a ceasefire is terrorism and opposing mass death is anti-Semitic. It is almost laughably ignorant, seemingly desperate to delegitimize Bushnell's action and in so doing the overall movement for which he did it. Liberatory movements are never so shallow as to be guided by the lazy dismissals from selfish detractors, and the Palestinian liberation movement is no exception. It is plainly absurd to suggest Bushnell will inspire more people to burn themselves alive. The political framework he contributed to is driven by a desire to improve social well-being. The communities that surround that framework are simply heartbroken by this loss. The denigrations as distraction are just more of the same marginal white noise that has always hovered around the pro-Palestine movement. After breaking news of Bushnell's death, social media flooded with expressions of love and mourning for him. The name Aaron Bushnell became a top trending term on Twitter for a full day. People sent me images of their art and poems they made for him. One of poems which have been created in honor of Aaron Bushnell. Drawing created by a Chinese artist. Picture is titled From Vietnam to Gaza. The artist draws a parallel between the two protest self-immolations. Thich Quang Duc in 1963 and Aaron Bushnell in 2024. Drawing created by a Mexican artist. The Associated Press report dated February 26, 2024. U.S. airman dies after setting himself ablaze outside Israeli embassy in Israel, Hamas war protest, by Michael Balsam. Washington Associated Press, an active duty member of the U.S. Air Force, has died after he set himself ablaze outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, District Columbia, while declaring that he will no longer be complicit in genocide. The 25-year-old airman Aaron Bushnell of San Antonio, Texas, died from his injuries, the Metropolitan Police Department said Monday. Later Monday, the Air Force said Bushnell was a cyber defense operations specialist with the 531st Intelligence Support Squadron at Joint Base San Antonio. He had served on active duty since May 2020. Colonel Selina Noyes, commander the 70th Intelligence, Surveillance and Reconnaissance Wing, said, "When a tragedy like this occurs, every member of the Air Force feels it. We extend our deepest sympathies to the family and friends of Senior Airman Bushnell." Demonstrators held a vigil for Bushnell outside the Israeli embassy Monday night. Memorials of Aaron Bushnell, a 25-year-old member of the USA Air Force who passed away after sacrificing himself outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, District Columbia, USA. Account of an independent journalist, Talia Jane, continued. Activists are doubling down on calls for a permanent ceasefire and end to Israeli occupation, invoking Bushnell's name to demand his death not be in vain. Vigils are sprouting up across the country. The movement is rife with immeasurable pain, not glorification. A movement of people drawn together by empathy is collectively heartbroken. Heartbreak breeds compassion, and compassion has been a core motivator of the protests for a free Palestine. On Tuesday night, I went to Times Square, where a vigil was held for Bushnell outside a U.S. Armed Forces recruitment center. Inherently a protest against the building and the wars it facilitates. Hundreds gathered in the heavy downpour, seemingly unbothered by the rain. It felt like an anarchist's winking sabotage in the vein of Joe Hill's "Don't mourn, organize." It was overwhelming to take in on its own. A 25-year-old, beloved, intelligent, kind, and thoughtful, now gone. A sign reading, "I will no longer be complicit in genocide," collected raindrops between bouquets of flowers. My head swirled, thinking about how my reporting contributed to this vigil. In response to the facts of the situation presented plainly, hundreds of people stood together in the pouring rain to mourn a man they never met, whose message they heard in his own voice before any outlet considered airing any of it. I wish I could freeze the vigil, shrink it down, and keep it in my pocket, carrying it with me everywhere I go, a totem of the pain that comes from the truth denied. And the responsibility of reporters to fight against that denial by any means necessary. This article sheds light on the ultimate protest action of Aaron Bushnell, first responses of American journalists, and efforts to communicate the immense event to reach more people throughout the globe. The live stream and its available footage, which was watched by many reporters and reviewed by law enforcement officials, in its now blurred part, reveals that a U.S. Secret Service officer approaches to ignited Bushnell. He points his gun on Aaron. This officer talks with another officer, and the conversation is heard behind the scene. In her article, the mentioned New York-based journalist Talia Jane asserts that the second USSS officer eventually brings a fire extinguisher only on the 61st second after the ignition started. The US Secret Service officer's reaction cannot be branded as prompt intervention to the incident with a burning protester before their eyes. In his February 26, 2024 interview for Newsweek, Senator Bernard Sanders says, Bernie Sanders breaks silence on Aaron Bushnell self-immolation. The jarring death toll of Palestinian civilians and the distressing images of children dead in the rubble of bombed buildings have resulted in mounting international calls for a ceasefire and increased pressure on US President Joe Biden and Congress to take a tougher line on Israel. Sanders, a progressive independent from Vermont who ran 2 campaigns for the Democratic presidential nomination, previously urged Biden and his colleagues in Congress to make it clear to Israel that any aid it receives from the US must not be used to kill civilians in Gaza. In his February 26, 2024 interview for Newsweek, Senator Bernard Sanders says, despite the increasing condemnation over civilian deaths and demands for a ceasefire, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly said that the army will continue its offensive to destroy Hamas, to bring home the remaining hostages, and to stop Gaza from posing a threat. When asked by a Newsweek reporter on Capitol Hill on Monday what his reaction was to the death of Bushnell, Sanders said it was a tragedy and denounced the number of women and children killed in the war. It is obviously a terrible tragedy, but I think it speaks to the depths of despair that so many people are feeling now about the horrific humanitarian disaster taking place in Gaza, and I share those deep concerns. In response to Newsweek's question on how the international community sees the US after such a harrowing incident, Sanders said, supporting Israel is a terrible mistake. We are increasingly isolated, he said. The international community understands that what Netanyahu is doing is a humanitarian disaster. It is a horror, and we continue to be one of the very few countries in the world that stand by Israel, and I think that is a terrible, terrible mistake. And as you may know, I'm doing everything I can to make sure that the United States government does not send another nickel to Netanyahu to continue this terrible war. February 26, 2024. Statement of some members of the President Biden staff. We mourn the loss of Aaron Bushnell, an active duty member of the US Air Force who lit himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in District Columbia because he could no longer be complicit in genocide in Gaza. We continue to call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire to end the ongoing starvation, death, and collective punishment of millions of Palestinians. President Biden failed Gaza by vetoing the ceasefire resolution for a third time. President Biden's refusal to acknowledge the human dignity of Palestinians is unacceptable, and instead of working with the majority of the world supporting a ceasefire, he continues to sanction Palestinian bloodshed and suffering. Aaron was always trying to think about how we can actually achieve liberation for all with a smile on his face. May his sacrifice be a haunting reminder for those who refuse to change course. Memorials and demonstrations with the name of Aaron Bushnell and his pictures in different parts of the globe. On February 27, 2024, Kira Havens, a veteran of the United States Air Force, published her article in Current Affairs, a magazine of politics and culture. She asserts, Bushnell placed his act within the context of the 143 days of horror Palestinians have suffered since October 7, 2023. He refused to be a part of it any longer. Not the white phosphorus burning children to the bone, not the indiscriminate bombings that killed 30,000 people, according to the Palestinian sources at the moment of publication of this article, and destroyed libraries, bakeries, schools, hospitals, and entire families, and not the celebrations of genocide happening on the other side of the Gaza border. Most press coverage has refused to print his last words, pretending to be unsure of motivation recorded with excruciating detail. A typical headline in the Wall Street Journal reads simply, U.S. Air Force member dies after setting himself on fire outside Israeli embassy, with no mention of Palestine. Online, trolls have taken the act of courage and honor and dismissed it as a last gasp of a deranged person who didn't know what they were doing. With the mindset of a schoolyard bully, they encourage anyone who does have their conscience stirred by Bushnell's actions to follow his lead. I have never heard such an echo from the emptiness at the core of some humans. It is an echo that says that rotting is done. There is nothing behind this facade but fear and dust. There is no place for agony to rest or to resonate. They are hollow, and they are wrong. Bushnell didn't give up in despair. He made a deliberate choice, one calculated to maximize the impact of his protest, to give appropriate weight to the atrocities being perpetrated in his name as an American and as a service member. He explained his thinking, chose his last words, set up a dead man's link on the video platform Twitch to ensure his sacrifice wouldn't be censored or lost. To deny this is to deny him his agency and his humanity in his very last act. Do we finally acknowledge that this system is untenable, or do we close our eyes to the agony it creates? Those mocking or denying Bushnell's self-immolation have already allowed their fear to consume them. In attempting to shred his reputation and cast aspersions on his motives, they reveal that they are unable to recognize the best parts of ourselves: courage, honor, self-sacrifice, and compassion. It is impossible for them to acknowledge the conviction and agony of this person is to realize that their own lives are a lie, built on pain of others and empty of meaning. People who believe in a supremacist ideology, like the Israeli officials who describe Palestinians as human animals, or the people around the world who support their genocidal actions, are cowards at their core. They justify their existence through exclusion, able to imagine their own humanity only when it is denied to others. They are unable to fathom that a person of conviction, of strength, of courage would sacrifice everything, give up their own life to stop the suffering of others they had never met. They do not understand what Bushnell did, and they would never be able to do it themselves. The last post Bushnell made online was as concise and confident as his last words. Aaron Bushnell's last post. Many of us like to ask ourselves, what would I do if I was alive during slavery, or the Jim Crow South, or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is, you are doing it right now. Bushnell made his protest during the administration of our president, who watched the Vietnam War unfold firsthand. He was speaking directly to our commander-in-chief, who has seen the aftermath of 3 wars fueled by lies and has now begun his own. Today, apparently unable to learn from history, he shows the same callous arrogance. Bushnell's self-immolation is unlikely to change that. It can change us, though, if we let it. The Vietnam War didn't end with Thich Van Duc's self-immolation. There were 12 more years of horrific bombings, of protests, of My Lai and Tet offensives. Kent State wouldn't happen for another 7 years. This is a long, long fight we are in. Let Bushnell's final act draw you closer to your convictions and to the people that share them. Let his cry echo through you and your actions for the years to come. Free Palestine. Indian author Naveen, a physician by profession, has been writing articles pertaining to politics with emphasis on social justice for more than 20 years on various platforms. On March 1, 2024, on an Indian source, The Wire, he published the article titled Aaron Bushnell's Self-Immolation Has Parallels in the History of Protest Movements. His final words were Free Palestine, a phrase that embodies the sentiment of millions of people in the world that have been protesting against the horrific genocide being perpetrated by Israel. He was barely 25. That makes him part of Gen Z, a generation often criticized as insular and apathetic to the world around them, but in reality seems to be well-informed and playing a pivotal role in protest movements. Not only now, but also in similar instances, such as the George Floyd lynching in 2020, even Subharan Singh, the 21-year-old farmer who was killed in the police firing incident on February 14th as part of the ongoing massive farmers' protest in India, belonged to this generation. A protester also self-immolated in Atlanta in December 2023, outside the Israeli consulate in support of Palestine. These stark incidents speak of unimaginable desperation and helplessness that drive them towards such acts. The impact on world history is self-evident. It is tragic that we claim to live in a modern world, but yet individuals are driven towards sacrificial pyres in an effort to jolt the collective conscience of genocidal and dictatorial regimes well into the 21st century. Bushnell's case is yet unique, as he is geographically distant from the scene of genocidal horror in Gaza and ethnically removed from the persecuted Palestinians. That shows his extraordinary ability to display empathy, a quality increasingly rare in human beings. In his last message to the world, he expressly stated that he didn't want to be complicit in genocide and indicted the ruling class for normalizing a genocide. His humility was writ large when he said, "Compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, his act was not extreme at all. His death is the world's loss. It is clear that as a US serviceman, he became disillusioned with the stated objectives of military force. He was able to see through the lies and deceit of Western support to Israel's genocidal onslaught in Gaza while claiming to work towards reconciliation. Bushnell worked in the US Air Force 70th Intelligence, Surveillance and Reconnaissance Wing, and some reports claim that he had classified information about US troops being directly involved in killings in Gaza tunnels. If true, this would be contrary to public claims by US government officials that there is no direct US involvement in Gaza. Regardless of this aspect, it is abundantly clear that Israel is able to carry on its brazen destruction of Gaza and death rampage only with the avowed support of Western world, specifically the USA. Multiple UN resolutions explicitly asking for a humanitarian ceasefire have now been vetoed by the USA. Billions of dollars and countless arms keep flowing to Israel from the USA and its bloodthirsty allies to keep feeding the insatiable hunger for mayhem. Aaron's death would hopefully shake the namesake US two-party oligarchy from its self-imposed slumber and force them to stop supporting a 21st century genocide. His self-immolation has the power to emerge as a watershed movement in history, but only time will tell us if there is truly a virtue called humanity that can end this misery, or if that is now just a word. There is another parallel with the sacrifice of Aaron Bushnell in the American history. His name is Norman Morrison, an American who protested the genocidal Vietnam War. On November 2nd, 1965, Norman Morrison arrived in Washington. Being under the Pentagon office of the USA Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, Morrison doused himself with kerosene and lit up fire. Norman Morrison had already for 10 years been married and been the father of a small daughter. Memories of him and of several other self-sacrificed American heroes have been carefully preserved in Vietnam at the state level. The Will by Aaron Bushnell. I am sorry to my brother and my friends for leaving you like this. Of course, if I was truly sorry, I wouldn't be doing it. But the machine demands blood. None of this is fair. I wish for my remains to be cremated. I do not wish for my ashes to be scattered, or my remains to be buried, as my body does not belong anywhere in this world. If a time comes when Palestinians regain control of their land, and if the people native to the land would be open to the possibility, I would love for my ashes to be scattered in a free Palestine. Aaron Bushnell left all his savings to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. Also, he mentioned that he left his cat to the neighbor. Bushnell sent this will to his friend ahead of time. Aaron will live forever. I know this because everyone who was loved by Aaron will carry a bit of him in their soul, and everyone who witnessed his sacrifice will carry him in their minds. Aaron cherished life. He knew that in giving up his own, he could give the people of Palestine a chance to keep theirs. Aaron has permanently changed the fabric of your being. You know this because for the rest of your life you will wrestle with the thought of what you will sacrifice for the liberation of others. My friend said that everywhere Aaron went, he planted trees. I imagine these seeds planted in our hearts and minds, they will sprout and they will grow into giant strong trees with deep roots built to weather the many battles that lie ahead on this burning planet. Iraqi Imam Sheikh Muhammad Ali Elahi about Aaron Bushnell. On Sunday, March 3, 2024, the Interfaith Prayer Vigil for Peace in Gaza was organized in Dearborn, Michigan. The diverse group included representatives of the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish clergy. According to the Islamic Organization of North America, memorial prayers were offered for airman Aaron Bushnell, who sacrificed his life in protest against the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Honoring Aaron Bushnell, Ali Elahi pronounced, "You are the poor martyr in this country." He continued envisioning that one day there will be the statues of Bushnell and squares of free Palestine. Bushnell is a great hero. He gave up his soul to save lives of Palestinians. March 10, 2024, gathering for unveiling the sign in one of the roads in the south side of the city of Jericho, which is renamed in honor of Aaron Bushnell. Unveiling the new street sign on Sunday, Jericho Mayor Abdul Karim Sidr said, Bushnell had sacrificed everything for Palestinians. We didn't know him and he didn't know us. There were no social, economic or political ties between us. What we share is our love for freedom and our desire to stand against these attacks on Gaza. from accusation of the Catars in anarchy as a social evil to the accusation of Vancouver-based anarchists in fomenting the riot which happened on June 15, 2011. The Catars, anarchists of the early Middle Ages in southern France. In the last quarter of the 12th century in southern France, the movement of Catars spread from Alps to Pyrenees. The word Catar appeared in the first half of the 11th century. The dominant Catholic Church labeled them heretics as the Catars criticized the Catholic Church for its support of the unjust social system and parasitism of clerics. According to Karl Marx, in Languedoc, the remnants of the Roman city rights and municipal government had been kept. Even in Toulouse, where the residence of the powerful count was situated, the independent magistrate and free committee of citizens ruled. Marx attested their state of affairs as flourishing. The Roman Church used aspersions and fictions about the Catars because their doctrine and way of life attracted masses of people. The number of Catars had been increasing. In the beginning, the Catholic Church fought with them by interdictions and anathemas, and later by bloody crusades. More than 1 million people were exterminated in the unequal struggle with crusaders. The state and the official church united in the pursuit of extermination of the Catars. Those who rejected the exploitative social ruling had been pronounced anarchists, posing the threat to the society. The Catars' principles and ruling were socialists in the essence. According to the official clerical doctrine, the goal justified the methods. Stephanie Law writes in the June 24, 2011 Vancouver Sun issue, self-identified anarchists and their supporters doubt the police and Mayor Gregor Robertson have evidence to support the claim that anarchists are to blame for instigating the Stanley Cup riot. Robertson and Vancouver Police Chief Jim Chu first identified criminals, anarchists, and thugs as instigators of the riot at a press conference held the day after the downtown destruction. Chu stood by that claim earlier this week. The June 15 riot erupted after more than 100,000 people gathered in front of giant screens to watch the Vancouver Canucks and Boston Bruins play Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. Glenn Coulthard, an assistant professor in political science at the University of British Columbia, said, "Anarchists are being unjustly targeted. That this gets tagged as anarchist activity is just more of an assumption or bias that has been around for a long time," he said. Coulthard explained that anarchism is a theory or political ideology that supports building communities without the hierarchical or bureaucratic structure seen in mainstream society. More than the majority of anarchists would ascribe to non-violent construction of alternatives to capitalism, government, police, or more repressive regimes, he said. So, for instance, people who are associated with anarchism include Gandhi and Leo Tolstoy. Gandhi was a prominent leader of India during the independence movement who firmly believed in non-violent means of social protest. And Leo Tolstoy is a Russian writer who became a Christian anarchist and penned many novels, including War and Peace. Coulthard added, That example of anarchism at play is Spartacus Books, a non-profit, collectively run bookstore and gathering space in East Vancouver. Self-identified Vancouver-based anarchist Jasmine Mujanovic, 24, said, "There is no evidence that anarchists were involved in the Stanley Cup riot." Mujanovic, a PhD student in political science at York University, said that anarchists, at least the ones he knows, always have a political purpose for rioting. Why would anarchists go burn hammers and slash corporate stores' windows and not advertise beforehand? He said. What would be gained if you are not spreading the political message at all? Mujanovic said the term anarchists have been used synonymously with chaos and mayhem by the police and politicians. Long-term Vancouver activist Cars Mullins, 40, said anarchists are generally organized and well prepared when they attend protests and riots. He added that also the Stanley Cup rioters smashed bank windows and looted from retail outlets. There was no sense of organization or political purpose to it. In the former Soviet Union, many streets were named after a famous Russian writer, Count Leo Tolstoy. In 1927, in the USA, two anarchists, Sacco and Vanzetti, were sentenced to death by the American court decision. Some streets of the Soviet cities were named to commemorate Sacco and Vanzetti. Also, they were born in Italy and later lived and worked in the USA. Can we imagine statues of Aaron Bushnell and squares of Free Palestine in the USA? By the way, there are no streets named after communists such as Harry Palit in England and William Foster in the United States. Meanwhile, their contributions in the anti-war movement and the fight for equality, better working conditions, welfare, and so on are well remembered by their successors in Britain and the USA. You watched my movie about martyrs, anti-war movement, and specifically about one man who contributed more than anyone else into this cause. Probably the anti-war struggle will continue for a long time. Tens of thousands protesters participate in the marches in front of the White House. From March to June 2024, thousands of students and staff together set the tent camps in many American and Canadian universities. Even the police intervention could not hamper the protests. Some American Army members ponder whether to continue serving or to discharge from the military. Some active duty members don't want to violate or contribute to violation of the American laws and international conventions protecting the civilian population in a wartime. Aaron Bushnell has become the first American Army active duty member who got the title of martyr immediately. Some people called him a martyr of humanity. Other airmen characterize him as kindest, but at the same time the most principled military member. The reverberation of his ultimate protest is tremendous in the USA as well as in other countries. Anti-war engagement is a part of political activity. Americans have the tradition of fight for peace, which has been formed during the Vietnam War and also the recent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The filmmaker Vadim Tikhonov. When working on this heartbreaking project, I perceived There was something bizarre in the actions of self-sacrificed Americans. It is something that looks surreal to such an extent that causes a brain became a piece of velcro pulling away from reality, as Talia Jane noted. I recalled several literary works belonging to the surrealistic genre which I read before and realized why some public didn't believe the breaking news about the extreme protest action of Aaron Bushnell. They demanded at least the video record of the incident to be shown. My aims in this project were as follows: to inform the viewers about martyrs in history and to illustrate how far the second meaning of the word martyr has been eviscerated over the centuries of Christianity. The central theme of the project was a martyr, airman, Aaron Bushnell.